Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks to the local Creative Mornings staff for inviting me and all the volunteers who make this happen, and for you for the nice warm welcome. This month's topic is broken, and I guess that is open to interpretation, but I'm going to share with you a little bit of a swimming story, which is a journey with a lot of lessons in it, and I'm going to highlight one of the lessons that I learned in concert with this month's topic. So some facts on the English Channel. I'll let you all do a lot of the reading, but from a distance standpoint, as the crow flies, it's 21 miles. However, there is a tidal flow that happens between England and France. And so it pulls you at one point in the tide closer and towards France, and when the tide shifts, it takes you away from France. So your swimming ability and your captain's navigation skills are really important. The Dover Strait is the busiest shipping channel. This is a static image from a GPS radar. And you can just see how many boats are going through. There are no swimming boats on this image at the moment. This is all traffic going to and from Northern Europe and across from England and France in ferry services. First conquered by Captain Matthew Webb in 1875. And nobody tried it again for another 30 years, which was an American named Gertrude Ederle. A female went over there and smashed the record, and that created a big kind of stink between the British and the Americans, both nationally and in the swimming world, interestingly enough. About 1,600 swimmers have crossed to date. Split on that is about just under 1,100 men and the rest women. The fastest time is 6 hours and 52 minutes, with an average time over all of the decades that people have attempted the channel of 13 and a half hours, which is the goal I set for myself, that I wanted to be an average swimmer once I figured out how to swim. The failure rate is significantly high. Still today, 4 in 10 fail because of the weather, because of their training, because of lots of things. So 10 years ago, that failure rate was 60%. So a lot of people would shell out a lot of money to go on a short boat ride and a long boat ride back to England. So technology advances in training, and lots of nutritional benefits that have come around to the endurance sports athletes have made the overall times come down naturally. But the weather is the weather, and that's the biggest impact. There are governing agencies and rules. These are two of the governing agencies, and the basic rule is a standard swim cap and goggles, and for men a bikini-style Speedo, and for women a standard one-piece bathing suit that doesn't extend onto the thighs or onto the shoulders. And if you don't wear that costume, you don't get counted. It's considered a untraditional crossing. So if you wanted to wear a wetsuit and hire a boat to go swim the channel, you could. You just wouldn't find it in any of the Federation documents or anything like that. So my background, as Genevieve noted, I'm a local Portsmouth boy from Broad Street. I did have a few token swim lessons as a kid, but it was for a purpose. My neighborhood friend Jeff Barnaby's father had a fishing business, and they had lobster traps. And I wanted to spend the summer out on the boat hauling traps on a 14-foot skiff with a 40-horse Mercury motor on it. And my entry was swim lessons. So when I was 8 and 9, I had a couple of Pierce Island token, whatever the American Red Cross genre of mid-70s swim lessons were, and that was about it. I didn't do it for wanting to join a swim team, because we didn't have one back in those days. So my goal was to get out on the lobster boat and spend my summers out there, which I did, and eventually worked on some of the gill netting boats that they had. So I've always had a love for the ocean, not only because I live in Portsmouth, but because of my fishing background. And I did end up scuba diving over time, and that just kind of reinforced the fact that all the cool stuff is on the bottom, and being up on top with a snorkel in your mouth or swimming and ringing the dinner bell probably isn't the place to be. And I love being on the bottom and looking at fish and all of that stuff. So I've had an inherent love for the ocean. And my current diagnosis is adult onset swimming disorder. Because as a kid, I didn't have any swimming background, and all of a sudden now I can allegedly swim really good. So fast forward in my life to my mid-30s, I was living out on the West Coast, and I was volunteering for an endurance training program that trained individuals to run marathons called the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society's Team and Training Program. My peers were really accomplished athletes, like the 1988 Olympic downhill skier, a marathon Olympian, and a lot of Ironman champions, and had distinguishing careers, and I ran like one marathon and they asked me to volunteer. But they convinced me that if I could run a sub 4-hour marathon, that I might be able to finish one of these things that I knew nothing about called a triathlon. And they said it involved swimming, and I said, sorry, I really don't know how to swim. And they said, well, you should come and swim with us because, you know, there's every level of swimmer there, and there's a coach that'll help you out. And so they pushed and prodded and bullied, might be a better term. And eventually I said, okay, what's the name of the swim group? And they said, it's called Masters Swimming. And my reaction was, no, Masters, I don't think so. Maybe something with a B in it, like beginner, or basic might be more my style. I mean, really, I don't know how to swim. And they said, Bob, every level of swimmer, just come and swim as long as you can and stay for coffee. So I said, all right, where is this swim? They said, oh, it's at Stanford University. And I'm like, you know, I don't think that that's the right venue for my reentry. There must be a junior college or like maybe a puddle or something I can step up from. So begrudgingly I went, and sure, there was every level of swimmer there. The first 3 people I recognized, by the way, none of my friends were there, was Olympian Dara Torres, Dover native and Olympian and Stanford graduate, Jenny Thompson, and then 6-time Ironman champion Dave Scott for one of the original Ironman. And so thinking I have my best moonwalk on to get out of there, the coach comes over and grabs me, and she says, you know, slow, fast, it'll come back to you. I jumped in because I was committed, swam the longest length of any body of water I'd been in, 50 meters, and I puked my guts out. And it was not pretty. And I'm trying to get it in the gutter, and the whole pool is erupted, everybody's swimming, and I might have lasted 20 minutes, and I got out and I said, this is not for me. And the coach was encouraging and said, well, at least stay for coffee, you know, you should try to come back. And so I went for coffee, and the social aspect of Masters took over, and I came back, and my second swim was about 20 minutes without a vomit, so I figured I was on the right path. And so I ultimately did a few half Ironman triathlons, not the big Ironman that most people have done. And this group socially was an open water community, and they actually invited me to go swim on relay teams in Maui, swimming from the island of Lanai to Maui in a 6-person format. And I said, I know why you're asking me. One, I can barely swim the minimum 30-minute requirement, and the slowest guy is the one that gets taken down by the sharks. So I was bait boy is what I felt like. But you know, they described it to me as it's 30 minutes of swimming and 5 days of Mai Tais. That sounded really interesting. So I went, and a couple of years I swam those 30-minute segments in the middle of the ocean blue, and that was really my entry into open water swimming at that time. But I was a typical triathlete. I didn't continue triathlons because I hated to swim. I struggled through it. I survived it. I got on the bike. I wasn't as good as on the bike as the run. When I got to the run, I was in my element. But I didn't swim, and I was typical triathlete who hated it. So fast forwarding, so in 2004, my significant other and I, Carol, moved back from California to New Hampshire. And I had been out of the water probably 1 year at that point and didn't get back into the water until about 2007, one of those bad New England winters, and was starting to put on the pounds and really didn't want to run on a treadmill or cycle on a stand. So I decided to go back to the pool. And a couple of years later, I had that breakthrough moment that we all dream about and we all read about, where I felt my swimming. I felt like I was sailing through the water with no effort. And I just said, repeat that feeling, keep doing it, repeat it, keep going. And then the coach in me took over and said, you better drink some water, you've been doing this for a while. And I stopped, and it was dark out, and the lifeguard staff had changed. And I had been going for an hour and 45 minutes. And I was like, wow, something just happened here. And I give the credit to my practicing of Pilates. Pilates isn't an exercise form that makes you a better athlete. It just kind of takes this everyday posture and restores it to its natural balance. I know everyone stands up when it sits up when I do that. So if you take this nice posture and you can hold it and you put it in the water like this, it goes through the water really well. And so that was my breakthrough. So now I had to do something with this newfound skill that I found later in my life. And so a friend of mine gave me a book on somebody's chronology of doing the English Channel. Next thing you know, I'm reading the boat captain's email address. I'm typing over here, ding, there's an answer. It's like, send me 500 pounds and I'll lock you in. So next thing you know, I booked a slot with the English Channel in 2012. Unfortunately, I was working for a startup at the time and work kind of took over, so I had to postpone it. And because of the popularity, the postponement goes out 2 years. So I had time to make a multi-year approach with certain milestones. In the 2010-11 time frame, I was swimming 10-mile events, feeling great, no problem. The year before, in 2013, I upped the events to a 15-miler and a 25-miler. My true test of whether or not I was going to be ready to go tackle the Mount Everest of swimming in less than a year. I tried to swim across the Long Island Sound in July of 2013, and I didn't finish. I was pulled from the water by my boat captain, which is something that I agree to do as a swimmer. It's the captain's boat. He's the supreme leader. If he feels the event should be ended for any reason, it's his call. Whether it's me and I'm fading, there's a problem with the boat, the weather's coming, anything like that. So I was pulled. And that was disappointing mentally. But 5 weeks later, I had another swim. For some reason, I thought swimming 25 miles across the lake would be easier than swimming across the English Channel. That one didn't go well either. I had a physical injury with a rib head that kind of popped out on my back, preventing my arm from recovering. And so that was brutal. I went into rehab, chiropractic work for the next couple of months, went into depression without being able to swim, and said, wow, I'm 7 months away from the English Channel, and it's now around the holidays. What am I going to do? So Carol and I went through an annual process of creating an intention wall, which is it's a lot more meaningful than a New Year's Eve resolution list. And the first thing she wrote up there was, Bob swims the channel. So that was it. It was written. It was going to happen. So I started to create a new plan for 7 months to try to get ready to swim despite the setbacks I had. So I made a plan. I started swimming, and things were going great. The first 3 months, I was ahead of plan. I was feeling strong, injury-free. My confidence was building. I set a huge endurance challenge with all of my 3 other endurance idiots that swim like I do, and to do 10,000-yard swims in the month of April. I busted mine out in 2 weeks, which was good, and everything just seemed really well with my swimming. My confidence was where it needed to be. Last year was behind me. And then on the 16th of April, this happened to our house. One final storm of the year, a big pine tree fell on our house, smashed our addition here, but punched through a skylight, and me being in a state of anger and testosterone and being an idiot, decided I'd get up on the roof with my pajamas and my running shoes on, trying to use a piece of oversized plywood to cover the skylight because the rain and the snow was coming in, and I slipped and fell, and this ended up happening. I landed like a ballerina on my right foot and got a severe foot fracture. So this was 3 months before my flight. So I go to the doctors. First guy gets emotional. The first guy took a look at it, and he's a buddy of mine, Dr. Siegel in Exeter. He looked at the x-ray from across the room and he says, you have to go see a specialist. I can't touch that. How you doing? That's how my introduction was to this. So I thought the swim was over. We drove to Bedford to see the specialist, and he looked at it and he says, wow, this is a doozy. He goes, I can't even go in there for a week. The swelling's huge. So I said, well, I got this little thing called a swim coming up. And he said, you're not going to be in weight-bearing physical therapy until well after the English Channel. So he says, let me do the surgery, do 4 weeks of horizontal life, and we'll take a look at what the x-rays look like. Those came back and they looked good. He was happy. So I asked him if I could swim the channel, and he says, I really can't advise you to do that because you lost 5 weeks of cardiovascular development. I can okay you to go back and start swimming. However, I can't say, yeah, go swim the channel. So I said, all right, I can swim. And he says, the rules are you can't put any weight on it, ding it, dang it, bump it, thump it, step on it. So those, were the rules that I had to work with for the doctor. So I decided to try. Carol supported that. She took on a lot of burden. And how did I do it? I crawled. I would be dropped off at the edge of the water, hand my crutches to Carol or one of my friends, Amy, a lot of folks in Exeter helped me out. And I would begin crawling until it was deep enough to swim. And hopefully I had somebody to swim with, because there was 2 or 3 occasions when I came back, and this is at Genis Beach here, when I didn't have any support and I came out of the water and I'm looking at low tide in a 300-yard crawl or so, and I'd look north and south looking for that romantic couple on their vacation, walking and I'm sitting down there with with the swim trunks on and a cap and goggles, and excuse me, can you help a brother out? And people rallied around me, and this was really the lesson, is that the more people heard my story, that I had some physical failures and I fell off my roof and now I'm crawling in the water, my family and friends and other resources came out of the woodwork to help me, because they became vested in my success. And the more I tried and persevered, the more people came out. And the interesting thing are the strangers that came out. And at the beach, there were on occasion those folks that I asked for help. And they would help. But the next day they would come up and they would see my gear. It's 2 crutches, right? Everybody knows where I'm sitting. And somebody like Carol or one of my crew may have been there, and they said, how far is Bob going today? Yeah, I helped him out the other day. Can't believe it. So they would ask and become invested, and I didn't even know them. And it was overwhelming and such a great thing. So now I've got the clearance from the doctor. I've been in the water for 2 days. Things are going well. Time to start training up for one last long swim. And all of a sudden, our dog passes away. Marley was a 7-year-old lab who had a very rare disorder. His esophagus basically didn't work. So Carol and I spent 5 years, basically hand feeding him meatballs, probably like 44,000 meatballs over the course of his life. I have to change slides real quick, sorry. So that was a real emotional setback, and now I'm down to 7 weeks to go before my event. So I make it over to the UK through planes, trains, and automobiles, and a lot of help from Carol with 17 bags and 2 crutches. It wasn't pretty. So there's a phone call process that you go through. There's a tide period that the captains will sell swimmer slots to. So in a 7-day time period, the captain may sell 3 or 4 slots, knowing that you can't swim all 7 days because of the weather. So every night you get a phone call at your guest house. They say, Bob, you need to be ready to go tomorrow. Okay, and then you get a phone call back. Sorry, you're not going to go tomorrow because the weather changed. So after 3 days, and now I'm 3 or 4 days into the tide period, if I don't swim in the tide period, I'm out. The next tide is a new group of swimmers. So the captain calls and he says, we wanted to talk to you because the weather's kind of rough for tomorrow, but we're going to give you the call. And I says, we're going, I don't care, I need to swim. And he says, well, here's the weather forecast, and this scale is the gale force scale or Beaufort scale, and they usually take solo swimmers out when it's a gale force of 1 or less, which reads basically 5 miles an hour or 3 miles an hour of wind, and that's it. They may take relay swimmers out at a force 2, 3 category, maybe around in here, under 10 miles an hour, because they only swim for an hour and then they change swimmers and then they swim for an hour. So they don't get beaten up for the entire duration. So that's what they told me my day was going to look like, a force 2, 3 category day, but they didn't know if it was going to go up or down from there. And what it did is it went up from there. And so I spent the day in force 4, force 5 conditions. And to give you an idea of what that looked like, this is from inside the boat.
That is a disorder.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I mentioned the boat traffic. Oh my gosh. I never expected to be this close to the boat. And when I looked up and saw it like a couple hundred yards away, I'm like, and who's driving our boat? Stevie Wonder? What's going on? This is pretty close call for me, or what I call a close call. So all this was going on, and I had asked the crew at some point, I said, hey, look, I know there were 3 other teams that started a couple of hours before me. I said, has any of the other teams given up yet? And they said, nobody's quit yet, but you've already passed them as far as, distance towards France goes. And I said, well, I'm not going to be the first one to quit. And I thought about all the people that all of a sudden became vested because I kept trying harder and harder, and said, there's no way, I just can't stop. I just put my head down and I kept going and I kept going. And I used that as a source of fuel amongst other things mentally across the way. And ultimately that led to me touching France with my hand, which was an amazing feeling, and finishing the English Channel. And this, thank you. So this is the actual trace of my course, which if you plot it out is more like a 30-mile swim because of that tidal flow impact, as you can see. And my time up there, I was shooting for 13 hours and a half, and I wanted that, and then I broke my foot, so I figured that was out the window, and then I was tossed up 8-foot seas and 20-knot winds, and I figured that was out. So I was thinking 15, 16 hours, doesn't matter, I finished. I don't care. And so when I got back on the boat, somehow with a broken foot and 3-foot waves, my crew comes up and we're congratulating. Question?
What was the water temperature?
Water temperature was extremely warm that year. It was 64 on the English side. I know that's cold, and like 68 on the French side. So for me, training in 50-degree water, that was a no-brainer. No-brainer. When I got back on the boat and we all was thanking everybody, the team for, our accomplishment, the captain shakes my hand. He goes, well done in really difficult conditions. You have the fastest time of the season. And I was shocked. And it didn't hold up to be the fastest time of the season. But when they told me it was 10 hours and 50 minutes, I was still emotional. I was shocked because I didn't think it could come together like that. And so it was pretty interesting way to end that. How are we doing on time, by the way?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay. 5 minutes left for Q&A, or did I?
No, for you.
Okay. So, it was really, a long swim, of course, to get there, but to be thrown so many challenges, I had to ask myself, could I do this? Can I basically start from scratch a couple of times to get my training to where it needed to be to finish, which was all I was looking for, was I wanted to join the club. I wanted to be the first guy from New Hampshire. I'm in the club 13 and a half hours, just like all y'all. This is me. And I had probably 12 or 15 mentors that had swum the channel, and I crushed all their times. They were just like, who is this? And it's really not about time, because the weather, I saw dozens, hundreds of jellyfish. I got stung a couple of times, but some people have gotten pulled out because they had bad reactions to jellyfish stings, and things like that. So, how this relates to this month's topic is I wanted to ask a question. How many in the room either work for currently or have in the last 5 or 10 years volunteer for nonprofit organizations? Pretty much everybody, which all of you are all the saints of the world. Have you ever asked yourself why we have so many nonprofits? There's about 1.5 million in the country. And the reason is because not enough is being done. There's always something that needs to be, there's always more that needs to happen. But individuals and groups step up and they create nonprofits, and that fills a gap in society. And they overcome a lot of challenges. And so you all have been through these particular situations where maybe your funding, your traditional funding sources all of a sudden back away, or the economy dives, or government regulations change on your particular cause. And it's really hard to do what you all do to overcome all of these challenges. So kudos to all of you, because if it wasn't for your efforts, things would be even more broken. And what I wanted to share was, when those times get tough, think of persevering, because ultimately those resources will come to you, those right resources that'll help you get to where you want to go through that next hurdle. But you really need to stay focused on that. And without you, things are going to remain broken, and your victories will be a compilation of small victories in your nonprofit world and your efforts. So I wanted to leave you with my story and with a wish of good luck for those folks working on causes that are filling gaps that are broken. Thank you.
We have time for about 10 or 15 minutes of questions, so I know you guys have some. So shoot them out this way. Do Pilates.
Oh, you said you got stung by a few jellyfish and that some people had worse reactions. Before you go, do they test you maybe to see?
Yeah, there's most of the big swims have a formal doctor's, medical clearance form that you have to go through. And knowing what's in the environment, you might think jellyfish is probably not the worst thing that might be underwater, but actually that's a fear more than the larger things with fins on that we all talk about, and well, we all don't like to talk about, those animals that will remain nameless. But most folks know if anybody have had allergies that might have had anaphylactic reactions. Those particular swimmers would be carrying an EpiPen, with them just in case. And in fact, I carry a little kit with me, which is vinegar and Benadryl and things like that. If all of a sudden I receive too much venom to have a reaction, which is what it would mean. Yeah. Carol.
What did the swimmer say when you got to swimmer's beach over?
Oh. Yeah, so I kind of skipped that part. I kind of stuck out like a sore thumb on crutches, and if you've ever been to the UK, you'll know that their beaches along that side of the island are stones. They're all pebbles. So crutching was really difficult, and so I had to crutch through the stones to get to the beach. And on the beach are a ton of swimmers who are training either for the channel or they're just there swimming, and everybody was like, yeah, he's going to be one of the 40%. And so people who are now today my friends told me that they wrote me off when they first saw me. And so it was pretty interesting. And I crushed that guy's time, which is good. So, question in the back. Yep, you're good.
Okay, so 10 hours in the water, what's your mental process there? What are you thinking about?
I mentioned a lot of the folks that helped me. And there's a lot of people in life that helped me. And I spent a lot of time thinking about my parents who weren't with us. And one of the other parallel, interesting, emotional facts, here we go again, was that I completed the channel on the anniversary of my mom's birthday. Wow. So that made it extra special. So mentally, I changed stations a lot. I do spend an awful lot of time thinking about my form because of the Pilates practice gave me that skill. And I knew that the quickest way to France was through efficient form. And the longer you stay in, the more you become susceptible to the cold or jellyfish or the salt, which has an impact on your mouth and everything. So I have a good ability to change channels, and the time just kind of slips by. It's probably, attention deficit disorder to some degree, but works really good for open water swimmers. So, we had a question here?
So you swim to France and you like tag, and then you go back in the water and get on the boat?
Yeah. So when I start, I was in the boat and I had to jump off, swim to England, crawl past the water line, and then they blew the horn and the siren to start the clock. And then I crawled back in the water and I started swimming. I couldn't touch the boat until after I touched France. My crew threw me water bottles of carbohydrate fuel, and that was my fuel. And that was tough at times because it was so rough. I, ultimately ended up ingesting, salt water, and I was trying to hold the puking from, the crew while, exhausting it underwater. And they told me later, it's like, no, we could see you doing it. And then it's like this big trail comes out behind you, So it was quite the challenge.
So do you enter a meditative state at any point of the swim where you're just, can you get into that state? And then the second part is, urban legend, I heard a story when you got off with John McMahon, John being the his crewmate. Tell him that story.
Okay.
Really cool.
So,
Meditative state.
meditative state, swimmer's high, I would switch in and out of that channel quite a bit. I would force myself out of that state to check my form, to make sure that, and that, I should say, I'm kind of categorizing that the way I usually swim. I was getting the snot knocked out of me pretty bad that day. And so at one point, they track the data of your progress, to give you an example of how bad it was. For 1 hour, I went 700 meters. That was it. And thankfully, the boat kept putting the boat in and out of gear, so it stayed there and didn't, do this, because I wasn't moving. I was in a washing machine of cross tidal flow-ish something or other, and it was a battle. So I had to think a lot more about the swimming than the meditative state because I was distracted by what was going on in the environment. And the story about when we got back, so the boat ride back was a long boat ride, and it was probably 2 hours. And it was basically going through the same conditions that I had swum through. I had it easy. The crew, I don't know how they did it or how they do it because the seas were pretty rough, and how they kept their, everything inside was good because I didn't. So we get back to shore. All of our stuff's at the top of the dock waiting for our ride, and I'm kind of off to the side on my crutches, got my hoodie on, bent over. And this group of swimmers comes over, and they're all wearing matching T-shirts, and they're all like a channel relay team. And you can watch the progress of swimmers online via GPS as they're going. So this crew comes over, and it's a bunch of Brits, and they're all excited, and they go right up to John, who's this tall, thin guy. And they're like, "Brilliant swim, mate! Well done! Fantastic!" And if you know John, John's like, "Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you." And he just takes it in. And how you feeling after that? You got the fastest time of the year in those tough seas. He goes, "I feel great." He goes, "I had a 3-hour nap because I took too much Dramamine for the first part of the swim, but you should go talk to the guy that swum it." And they look over, and I'm over there, I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "And he's wearing braces, oh my God." So it was like an instant celebrity the next day because it's kind of hard to hide the guy on the crutches. So people would come up and, introduce themselves and congratulate me, and it was like, wow, this has like never happened to me in my life before, So it was quite an interesting experience.
What's your next swimming adventure?
So I had to see if I wasn't a one-hit wonder and that all this adversity gave me a home run kind of day and that was it. And so I then challenged myself with what's called the Triple Crown of open water swimming. And just like the Triple Crown of horse racing, there are 3 major swim events recognized by this open water community, and only 125 swimmers on the planet have ever completed all 3. So in 2015, I signed up and swam around Manhattan Island, which is 28.5 miles. And that was the second leg of the Triple Crown. And then this summer, on August 24th, I'm traveling to Catalina Island off the coast of California swimming to Los Angeles, and that'll be the Triple Crown. So.
How much pain were you in throughout that day?
You know, this is the weird thing, because the day after, minus the foot part, the real pain that I had was my mouth was swollen from the salt, my tongue was enlarged and yellow, disgusting looking. Physically, I was tight, but I felt like I could have gone down to the harbor and swam with the folks and loosened up a little bit. But I didn't, want to kind of go and, I'm the guy that's hit the fastest time, I'm down here rubbing it in the next day. So, that's when finally, the business part was over. Now we could go sightseeing. So, and that was a joy, crutching up those damn hills to the castle. Anyways, it was fun. Yeah, Noelle.
Thank you so much for being here. I have a question because I'm a self-identified non-athlete at all, and I'm always inspired and amazed by, there's that physical component that you talk about, but mostly I'm just struck by this sort of spiritual, mental component of what makes athletes persevere. And so I wondered if you had a mantra and or like a word, or you talked about that intention wall and how you connect to that part, the physical part, but just that sort of the willpower to keep.
Yeah, well, there are. I have a lot of mantras. A lot of them address the physical component about being long and streamlined and stuff like that. On the mental side, I kind of gathered strength from other unsung hero kind of stories in history, from baseball to other sports, or even in business where it's a rags to riches kind of story, and saying that somebody who didn't have the ability all of a sudden has the ability. And I kept pushing myself, saying, if I can stay as focused as that person and rely on the other mental resources that I use, then I could finish it. So the mental part is the tougher part of the two, because it's the mental part that tells the physical part to go or not. And so taking on this type of challenge, or whether or not it is climbing Mount Everest, it's really about between the ears, because you got to keep the paddles and the feet moving. And only your brain tells you to stop that. So, there's another question over here, yeah.
Why did you have such a relatively fast time?
I have no idea. That's why I swam New York the next year, was to see if I, had some sort of massive push of the tidal flow that helped. And when I swam Manhattan, you swim with the currents, and the race director has a computer model, and he punches in some of your data, and he'll spit out your time. And again, I wanted to be the average person in New York, and so that was about 8 hours and 30 minutes. Current-assisted swimming. So I would be right there in the middle, right there with the average. And so when I finished the swim, our interesting part of the story is I started on the East River about halfway up the island, traveled up through the Harlem and entered the Hudson, came down the Hudson to Battery Park and back up the East River again. Okay. By the time I made it to the Hudson River, the director of the race was on my safety boat, and I was stopping to take a fuel break, and he comes up and says, "You need to drop your effort by 50%. And I'm like, I have one gear. This is endurance. I don't have two. I don't have three. It's just go. And he says, you're going to make it to Battery Park an hour before the current changes on the East River. And you're going to have to swim over to Governor's Island an extra 2 miles or an extra mile, and you're going to have to tread water. So you either slow down now or not." And so what I think my difference is in my swimming is that my consciousness of my body position and my ability to be aware and not panic in the open water is probably at a higher level than most athletes, which allowed me to enter the sport relatively late and have really good results. And I think it's my body position that's unique, and if you're not pushing water or dragging water, you're going through it or with it. And I think that's my secret sauce.
So how'd you do with Manhattan? How'd you finish?
So, I get on the boat and the race director says, "Wow, that was a really fast time." And I said, "Oh, you know, I don't really care as much as a lot of people do." And he goes, 7 hours and 15 minutes. I'm like, so much for your model. You know? And so it turned out to be the 28th fastest time in the history of Manhattan out of 850 solo swimmers. If you add in the additional 175 relay teams that have done it throughout the years, it's the 29th fastest time in history. So, crazy. So, I'm exploring the swimming thing.
Did you tread water? Or did
Yeah,
you
so when we got in New York, you mean?
Yeah.
So I got onto Battery Park, and we were still early. So we had to swim over to Brooklyn, just across the East River, and we tucked away in a little, pier area and treaded water for about 12 minutes. And then they said the current changed, and we got back out, and at that point it was like getting on an escalator. So.
Well, I think we're going to wrap it up, guys.
That was awesome.
Thanks.